Welcome to the recording of the 258 Physical Education EC-12 Framework Overview and CRI Deep Dive webinar that originally took place on Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. My name is Kelly Torrey and I am a Test Development Specialist on the Educator Standards and Certification team. And alongside the other folks on this team, we're excited to bring you a recording of this webinar as we launch capacity building for our 2024 exams. These virtual meeting norms were shared with participants on the July 2nd session, including a reminder to invite all perspectives to the table, lean into the stickiness of the work, ask all the questions, anticipate change, expect non-closure, let it sit, as well as a reminder to remain on mute for the duration of our whole group session. Our objectives for this webinar are as follows. Explore frameworks for an updated physical education pedagogy exam. Engage with framework crosswalks for the updated exam to highlight key similarities and differences. Closely examine examples of constructed response items for the redesigned exam and engage with suggested approaches for candidate response. And finally, for our session on July 2nd, we had an objective around engaging with EPP colleagues in an unconference. Our agenda for this session, we will review some general information around exam redesign, then engage with the 258 PE framework overview and crosswalk, take a moment to pause for some guiding questions, then transition into a review of some CRI general information as well as a constructed response item deep dive before we close out. We'll now review some general exam redesign information. First, redesigned exam development for the 258 physical education exam began in 2021. This spring of 2024, the preparation manual for the redesigned exam became available. This summer 2024, the representative form and then our interactive practice test became available. And finally, the exam launches in September of 2024. Capacity building, including this framework and CRI deep dive webinar, are taking place in summer of 2024. From the exam one-pager, here are some important dates to remember. The prep manual for the redesigned 258 physical education EC-12 exam became available in spring of 2024. On June 4th, 2024, registration opened for the 258 physical education EC-12 exam. As of July 1st of 2024, the representative exam and interactive practice test are available. September 1st, 2024 is the last date to take the 158 PE EC-12 exam. Beginning on September 2nd, 2024, the 258 physical education EC-12 exam will launch. And looking ahead to next year, September 1st, 2025 is the last day to apply and recommend using a score on the older 158 exam. Here are two important notes. The 258 exam is not representative of a new certification area. The name of the certification area remains the same. The only change is the exam number from 158 to 258. Programs will not have to reapply to offer this certification. We'll now take a moment to discuss exam structure. For our older 158 exam, candidates had a 5-hour seat time to answer 100 multiple choice questions. For our redesigned 258 exam, candidates will have 90 selected response items, 90 multiple choice questions that will include a number of cluster items or multiple choice questions that are related to each other. Candidates will also be responsible for completing one constructed response item on the redesigned 258 exam. We'll now review the framework overview and crosswalk. As we review this information, here are a few guiding questions to keep in mind. What key similarities do you notice between the 158 and updated 258 PE frameworks? Where do you notice shifts in the organization or content of the 258 framework? How might these shifts impact your program's preparation of physical education candidates? And finally, what other questions do you have about the updated 258 EC-12 framework? A quick note on the 258 PE EC-12 framework crosswalk. This resource, moving alongside the launch of the 258 exam, crosswalks new 258 framework content with previous 158 exam content. On the left-hand side, you can see the 258 framework organized by domain, competency, and descriptive statement, as well as an indication of whether or not there was aligned content on the previous exam framework. If there was previous aligned content, that descriptive statement is on the right-hand column, as well as in red, an indication of where that content can be found. A quick note on vocabulary. As with other exam frameworks, the 258 PE EC-12 framework is organized into domains, competencies, and descriptive statements. The domain is the organized collection of knowledge, skills, and abilities that serve as the foundation for the exam. Within each domain, there are competencies that examine what teacher candidates should be able to do in each domain. And finally, within each competency, descriptive statements provide examples of how teacher candidates demonstrate understanding of each competency. In terms of organization, the earlier 158 exam framework was organized into 5 domains and 15 competencies. The redesigned 258 framework is organized into 5 domains and 13 competencies. The 258 PE EC-12 framework is made up of 5 domains. Domain 1 is movement, knowledge, and skills. Domain 2 is health-related fitness. Domain 3 is the physical education program. Domain 4 is educating all learners and professional practice. And Domain 5 is constructed response. We'll now take a closer look at each domain and competencies within the domain. Within Domain 1, movement, knowledge, and skills, we have 3 competencies: motor development and motor learning, movement concepts and biomechanics, and movement activities and sports. Within Domain 2, health-related fitness, we have principles of personal fitness and conditioning, development of health-related fitness, and health and wellness. Within Domain 3, the physical education program, we have instruction and assessment in physical education, learning environments, and organization and management. Within Domain 4, educating all learners in professional practice, we have differentiation strategies in planning and practice, culturally responsive practices, and data-driven practice and formal and informal assessment. A quick note that Domain 4, educating all learners in professional practice, is our universal domain and is present in all redesigned exams. Finally, Domain 5 contains 1 competency, which is the constructed response. Constructed response items are also present in all redesigned exams. Competency 1 on the 258 PE EC-12 framework contains similar content from the previous 158 framework from Competency 1. Competency 2 contains information from 158, Comps 2 and 3. Competency 3 contains information from 158, Comps 4 and 5. Competency 4 contains information from 158, Comp 6. Competency 5 contains information from 158 Comp 7 and 8. Competency 6 contains information from 158 Comp 9. Competency 7 contains information from 158 Comp 10. Competency 8 contains information from 158 Comp 11. Comp 9 contains information from 158 Comp 12. Competency 10 includes differentiation strategies and planning and practice. Comp 11 contains culturally responsive practices. And Comp 12 contains data-driven practice and formal assessment. Competencies 10, 11, and 12, again, are our universal domain. And finally, Comp 13 contains the constructed response item. We'll now take a moment to look at the reorganization of content in the 258 exam framework, as well as any new additions as we transition to the updated exam. Comp 1, again, contains content from 158 Comp 1, but does contain specific callouts to developmental phases and use of appropriate cues, prompts, and providing feedback to students. Comp 2 contains content from 158 Comp 2 and 3, and the 258 exam framework separates out locomotor and non-locomotor movements, manipulative and rhythmic skills, and the integration of each into separate standards. Comp 3 contains information from 158 Comps 4 and 5, and 258 contains specific callouts to the knowledge and application of offensive and defensive strategies. Comp 4 contains content from 158 Comp 6. Comp 5 contains content from 158 Comp 7 and 8, and includes the addition of a standard specifically for the components of flexibility. Comp 6 contains content from 158 Comp 9. Comp 7 contains content from 158 Comp 7. Comp 8 contains content from 158 Comp 11. Comp 9 contains content from 158 Comp 12, with the addition of culturally responsive communication and collaboration with stakeholders, and the utilization of technology and professional networks for professional growth. Our universal domain contains practices that inform identification and implementation of strategies and practices to support all students, developmentally appropriate assessment practices, and the application of PE-specific knowledge and skills. These make up our universal domain, educating all learners in professional practice. Here you can see the approximate percentage of the exam made up by each domain. Domain 1, movement knowledge and skills, makes up approximately 22% of the exam. Domain 2, health-related fitness, makes up approximately 22% of the exam. Domain 3, the physical education program, makes up approximately 22% of the exam. Domain 4, educating all learners in professional practice, the universal domain, makes up approximately 13% of the exam. And Domain 5, the constructed response, makes up approximately 20% of the exam. As you review this information, here are a few questions to consider. What are some priorities you can see in having the exam weighted in this way? Ultimately, what does this mean for candidates? And where can you see differences or shifted priorities from the previous exam? We'll now take a minute to revisit our reflection questions. What key similarities do you notice between the 158 and updated 258 exam frameworks? Where do you notice shifts in the organization or content of the 258 framework? How might these shifts impact your program's preparation of physical education candidates? And what other questions do you have about the updated 258 exam framework? We'll now transition to reviewing some CRI general information and our CRI deep dive. Generally, the constructed response is an opportunity for candidates to demonstrate their subject-specific knowledge, skills, concepts, and best practice. Candidates should be prepared to provide a constructed response item of approximately 400 to 600 words. And the constructed response makes up 20% of a candidate's overall exam score. Three performance characteristics are used to create rubrics to score candidate responses. The first performance characteristic, completion, is the degree to which the candidate completes the assignment by responding to each task in the assignment. Second, application of content measures the degree to which the candidate applies the relevant knowledge and skills to the response accurately and effectively. And finally, support is the degree to which the candidate supports their response with appropriate evidence, examples, and explanations based on the relevant content knowledge and skills. Constructed response items are scored on a scale from 4 to 1, with 4 being the highest. A 4 response reflects a thorough understanding of relevant content knowledge and skills, and fully addresses all parts of the assignment, demonstrates an accurate, highly effective application of the relevant content knowledge and skills, and provides strong, relevant evidence, specific examples, and well-reasoned explanations. A 3 response reflects a general understanding of relevant content knowledge and skills. The candidate would address most or all parts of the assignment, demonstrate a generally accurate, effective application of relevant content knowledge and skills, and provide sufficient evidence, some examples, and generally sound explanations. A 2 response reflects a limited understanding of relevant content knowledge and skills. This response addresses at least some parts of the assignment, demonstrates a partially accurate, partially effective application of relevant content knowledge and skills, and provides limited evidence and examples or explanations. When provided, they may be only partially appropriate. A 1 reflects little to no understanding of relevant content knowledge and skills. A 1 response addresses few, if any, parts of the assignment, demonstrates a largely inaccurate, ineffective application of relevant content knowledge and skills, and provides little to no evidence, and if provided, examples or explanations are weak or inappropriate. Candidates may also receive a score of a U. The response may be unscorable because it is unreadable, not written to the assigned topic, written in a language other than English, or does not contain a sufficient amount of original work to score. A score of a B will be given when there is no response to the assignment. We'll now take a look at 2 sample 258 physical education EC-12 constructed response item responses. We'll first review the 258 PE EC-12 CRI charge, which is made up of 5 specific tasks that candidates must address in their response. 1, candidates will identify a learning objective that is aligned to the given TEK and explain why the learning objective is appropriate for that physical education class. They'll describe 1 instructional activity, including any teaching strategies, equipment, and skill progressions you would use to promote student achievement of the learning objective. Candidates should explain why the activity they described would be developmentally appropriate and effective for promoting students' skilled movements in relation to the learning objective. Candidates should identify one challenge students may encounter during the activity that they described and explain how they would differentiate instruction or adapt the activity to maximize participation. And finally, describe one approach for assessing students' conceptual understanding and skill-based learning in relation to the learning objective and instructional activity. Within the constructed response prompt, candidates are also provided an exhibit, which is the specific TEK that the candidate is required to utilize throughout their constructed response. In the examples we'll look at today, we are engaged with this K to 5 TEK. As a reminder, there are 5 specific tasks within the PE constructed response that candidates must address within their written response. Take a moment to review this sample constructed response item. As you're reviewing, consider the following. Where do you see evidence of the candidate's understanding of PE-related knowledge, skills, or related concepts? Does this response answer each component of the CRI charge in full? And does the sample response contain accurate evidence or examples to support their instructional strategy? Within the first part of the sample response, we're looking for evidence that the candidate has identified a learning objective that is aligned to the given TEK and an explanation of why the learning objective is appropriate for this physical education class. Here you can see the candidate names a specific learning objective, as well as describes why the learning objective is appropriate for this PE class. Next, we're looking for evidence of a description of one instructional activity, including teaching strategies, the candidate would use to promote student achievement of the learning objective they identified. Here you can see a thorough description of the instructional activity, including teaching strategies the candidate would use. Next, the candidate is asked to explain why the activity they described would be developmentally appropriate and effective for promoting students' skilled movement in relation to the learning objective. Next, the candidate is asked to identify one challenge that students may encounter during the activity they described and explain how they would differentiate instruction or adapt the activity to maximize participation. Finally, the candidate is asked to describe one approach for assessing students' conceptual understanding and skill-based learning in relation to the learning objective. Overall, this candidate fully addresses all parts of the assignment, demonstrates accurate, highly effective application of skills and knowledge, provides specific examples and strong, well-reasoned explanations, and this sample response would receive a score of a 4. We'll now take a look at a different sample response. As you review, take a moment to consider the following. Where do you see evidence of the candidate's understanding of PE-related knowledge, skills, or related concepts? Does this response answer each component of the CRI charge in full? Does the sample response contain accurate evidence or examples to support their instructional strategy? Within this sample response, this candidate partially describes the learning objective, but does not explain why the objective is appropriate other than to mention that the locomotor skills are needed to play the game. Next, the candidate does provide an instructional activity, but offers limited evidence for the advancement of student achievement towards the learning objective within their description. Next, the candidate provides limited evidence or examples or explanations that are only partially appropriate. Finally, the candidate does not explain why the objective is appropriate, other than to mention that locomotor skills are needed to play the game. Their response offers limited evidence and only partially explains how to differentiate instruction. And while the candidate does provide an approach for assessing student knowledge and skills via an exit ticket, the candidate does not provide an explanation for how this relates to students' achievement of the learning objective. Overall, this sample response provides limited evidence, examples, or explanations, and when provided, those may only be partially appropriate. The instructional activity described offers limited evidence for the advancement of student achievement toward a learning objective. The explanation of how to differentiate instruction lacks the support of an appropriate explanation or example. And little description is given of the method of assessment other than the mode and directions to explain what they learned. Overall, this sample response would receive a score of a 2. Now that we've reviewed 2 sample candidate responses to the PE constructed response item, consider the following questions. Why is it important to answer each specific task within the constructed response item? Where do you anticipate candidates may or may not provide a complete response? How might you support candidates to apply their learning within a constructed response item? And finally, how can you support candidates to leverage appropriate evidence, examples, and explanations within their constructed response? Thank you for participating in the recording of today's webinar. We hope you have found this helpful. Have a wonderful afternoon.